Generative AI takes the center stage, but is your enterprise still watching from the sidelines? Come on in, let's fix that. This is Not Another Bot, the Generative AI Show, where we unpack and help you understand the rapidly evolving space of conversational experiences and the technology behind it all. Here is your host, TJ.
Hello and welcome to Not Another Bot, the Generative AI Show. I'm your host, TJ. With us today is James Timberlake. He's a multifaceted professional with an impressive career spanning business brokerage, transmedia production, and most notably, AI-assisted independent publishing. James is the co-founder of Noob Studio and Metaskies Inc., as well as the founder of the Story Sherpas, an AI ghostwriting service that has reshaped the independent publishing landscape. With a rich academic background in philosophy and artificial intelligence from revered institutions like MIT and Yale, James brings a unique perspective to the intersection of AI, creativity, and publishing. A prolific author, AI enthusiast, and forward-thinking innovator, James isn't just riding the wave of AI evolution in publishing, he's actually shaping its course. Welcome, James, to the show.
Thank you so much.
Hope that introduction was good. All right, so let's get started. And the way we do this is, James, we would love to know more about you. So the first question is always about you. So could you actually walk us through your journey all the way from academic studies in philosophy and AI at prestigious institutions to becoming a thought leader in the field of AI in independent publishing, especially as a founder of the Story Sherpas and an author?
Yeah, sure. It's like most things in life, I imagine. It happened by accident, right? Yeah, I graduated seminary and thought that was going to be my life, but had some interesting interactions with some of my fellow classmates, and it left me a little disillusioned in some of the practical sides of ministry. That's what led to me getting a second degree in business and philosophy. And started off in retail, got robbed at gunpoint. So I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So that's I went into like inside sales, which led to marketing and project management. And yeah, it was crazy. So it just progressed from there and eventually got to the point where I got to work on some really fun projects that helped me expand my horizons on what I was exposed to, and eventually led to, as you mentioned, starting Story Sherpas, which originally was just a ghostwriting shop. We did everything manually, and we just helped people, professionals, celebrities, high net worth individuals tell their stories, either to become a thought leader or they wanted to leave a legacy or something of that nature. And what we started doing is just slowly integrating more and more automated systems. So first we automated the transcriptions, right? And then the transcriptions, we were like, now that we have those, what can we automate some of the editing and breaking it up into sections? And can we start automating some of the interviews, right? And start doing the video interview. And so we just started slowly adding different aspects of what our workflow was. We just kept adding different systems or expanding the systems we had until we could automate more and more of it. And I eventually sold that company, and it went on and has a new life now, which is great. And that freed me up to do a lot of my own kind of personal experimentation with writing and things like that. So I was like, okay, so that's interesting that I could do that. But more recently, I've had a lot of exciting conversations. So Metaskies, as you mentioned, that's my kind of one of my current companies that I'm a co-founder of, and we're working with what we call personalized generative entertainment, right? And so one of the companies that you might be familiar with right now that's just doing really groundbreaking work with this is Fable Simulation. And if you're not familiar with the name, or if your audience isn't, they might be familiar with their case study that they're about to pull down, actually. But right now you can still see it, where they have a platform where you can create your own South Park episode, and you go on there, you tell them exactly who you want in it, what you want the scenario to be. I want this guest star, or I want this kind of thing. And it actually builds a thing. And so I've been talking about that concept for the last 2.5 years pretty often. And most people didn't, it's never going to happen. Then all of a sudden, ChatGPT came out and Midjourney came out and Dolly and all these. And all of a sudden, everybody's, maybe, but it'll be like 5 or 10 years. I'm like, no, you don't understand. And now people are starting to see it. And they're like, oh, yeah. So anyway, yeah.
That's what you were talking about. Yeah. I know. Totally.
Yeah. And
awesome. No, this is brilliant.
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
it's exciting. It's exciting to see because I think right now, especially with the writer strike that's in Hollywood, right, and now even the actor strike as well. And but these are not new conversations, right? Especially the writers have been underpaid for years, right? They've been fighting this for years, but now the actors are starting to see that, oh, I'm in trouble too because now you can take my license, like my image, and you can license it. And so now, take Marvel as an easy example. I no longer have to pay Chris Hemsworth increasing amounts of money every year, every time I want a Thor movie, and also have to worry about the fact that he's supposed to be a god that doesn't age, but he ages every year. So now we're spending money to de-age them back. It's at some point you could just do a life model and just create them. And then you have the character rather than the actor. And that's what the studios are really fighting for, is they want to own the characters and the digital likeness of those characters. And believe it or not, AI has now become the sticking point in these contract negotiations. They're not even fighting about writing, wages, any of this. The main sticking point is AI of all things, because they see it as an existential threat, which it is.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Indeed. Like you're just taking somebody's, I wouldn't say job, but precisely saying, hey, you know what? I need the character because for which you certainly were known for, but I need to ensure that I could use it for years together. And I could do that with AI. So totally, for them, it's okay. What am I going to do now? If AI can do it, the whole damn thing totally makes sense. Interesting.
Yeah.
On that similar thought, then, what excites you about the potential of AI and automation in independent publishing, particularly in the context of ghostwriting with AI?
For me, the thing that's most exciting is that it really does free up the independent storyteller. And that's what's exciting to me, is people being able to, in the short term, tell their stories to other people, right? Like one thing that I just saw was somebody, and this is one of the things we're working on at Metaskies as well, is being able to go in as a complete novice, just a fan, and say, man, I'd love to see a movie about this and this. Maybe it's based on my life or an experience, or maybe it's just an idea that I've had forever, but I don't know how to write a script. I'm a complete novice, but I know that there's a inkling of an idea of a story that I've never seen whether I want to represent the culture I'm coming from or my unique background, or maybe it's just something completely fanciful that I've never seen that I'd like to see. And so now I can go and I can use these AI tools to take the images and the stories that are in my head, and I can put them together into a 30-second little, what I tell people is you can either do a 10-page comic, because that's pretty easy to do. You could do, if you're a little bit more technical, you don't mind doing some more of the dive in and doing something like taking Midjourney and putting it into Runway, something like that. Now you can take your comic and you can convert it into like a motion comic, if you will. And if you do a little bit more iteration, well, now you have a trailer, right? And you could take that trailer and you can build support, go get a Patreon or whatever, and then you can build it to be as big as you want. And so now it's no longer this, oh, I have this great idea, but no one in Hollywood would ever listen to me. You don't need them to. Just go make the thing and then make the next version and the next, and eventually you can build your own audience and you can be your own mini studio. And that's really where, to me, that's what's exciting, is we're going to see 1-person, 2- and 3-person studios taking over with these new massive IPs.
Oh, brilliant. Wow, that's definitely visionary. But how does AI in this context of publishing, ghostwriting, and beyond, with its ability to analyze and process vast amounts of data, contribute to a more streamlined and effective content curation, and also the vetting process, whether this is, I don't know if the copywriting is a concern anymore, or should be predominantly, but how are you vetting that, or how are you creating that effective content? But this is the sort of content I need. So what's that, looking at that amount of data which you have to deal with, how's that kind of done today? And what's your take on that, James?
Yeah, I think, so basically, I think right now, a lot of people see, especially in publishing and marketing in general, any written content, people think that it's like, AI is going to write it for me. And it can, but it's not going to be good, right? And even the parts that are good are going to be generic. And so you can just start with, say, a prompt of write me about this. But what we found is far more effective, at least in our purposes, is having the person write from the heart, because that's the part the AI doesn't have. So you don't have to worry about grammar. You don't have to worry about sentence structure. It doesn't even have to bloody make sense to you. Right? You know what I'm saying? And so I think for a lot of people, that's a huge opportunity to go, just write, or even better, you don't have to write, just speak and let it do real-time transcription. Just get it out of your head and then feed it to something like ChatGPT or there's other programs too. However you want to do it, depending on your goals, you can now just get it out in its rough form and it'll reformat and it'll pull out that context and it'll pull out and it'll reword it in a way that is more or less aligned with whatever format you train it on. And again, you can do the easy way or the hard way. You could just plop it into ChatGPT and say, hey, help me edit this. And you can give us some parameters. Bring this down to an 8th grade reading level, fix any grammar, shorten it by 20%, get rid of any redundancies and any areas that you see that I need to add more context or because you could talk to if areas have more context, prompt me to do. And so then it'll re-spit you out a different format. So take that draft, edit it, change it, repeat that process till you're happy. That's the basic, simple way anybody could do, even with the free ChatGPT, right? And then if you have the ability to do a custom trained model, or even just using custom parameters within ChatGPT, I guess you could do it too. But the real power is if you can do custom trained models, because at that point, then what you can do is, especially if you're working with an author that has some kind of established body of work, or even like a thought leader who maybe has done a lot of tweets or they've done a lot of blog posts or LinkedIn posts, something like that, then you can take all that content and feed it as a custom training data set, and then you'll create an author profile. So then as you're starting to feed it, it's not pulling from the entire large language model and trying to cram it. It's saying, no, you write like this. This is your style. These are the things. This is your cadence. This is your voice. So I'm going to do my best to copy that. And so the more you can train your custom models, then the closer it'll be to your voice. And that's what to get back to what's exciting. I think you're going to see more and more people building out these custom avatars, if you will, and then using them as co-writers, right? So again, whether I'm feeding you an idea and then I have it build it out into a full blog post, or maybe I just do a journal and then I say, hey, here's my daily journal, convert this automatically into one LinkedIn post, one Twitter thread, and then also go ahead and insert a chapter into Chapterly for me. So that can be expanded into a full chapter, but at least I have my draft. So you can get 10 pieces of content, some complete, some drafts, out of one conversation or one free writing session. And so as an independent author or even just content creator, this unlocks a lot of potential to just every day create 10, 20 pieces of content from an hour, as opposed to what you had to do before, where it was more iterative. You would release the book first, and then you would take a chapter from the book and you'd put that into a newsletter. And then you would take some sections out of that newsletter and you'd use it for social and you break it down that way. Now you don't have to do that. You can do it all at once from a single source. And so the volume of output is going to be, I think, a lot higher as more and more storytellers, authors, just thought leaders in general start embracing that as a kind of a co-author.
It does answer the question. I think it really brings a lot of different perspectives beyond what I was asking. So thank you so much for going deeper. I think keeping the accuracy and hallucinations in mind too, given that's equally critical. And given ghostwriting has garnered so much of attention recently, does it really create that sort of quality content with less hallucinations? And to what extent can we trust the AI to produce more compelling narratives? And second part of that question is, I think you touched upon it, bringing that unique style of the author, whether it's a writing style or the tonal quality and beyond. Is generative AI able to accurately replicate those? And those will be my follow-up questions from what we are discussing. At the moment.
So the short answer is yes. It's just a matter of, it's like most things. It's a matter of, it's like a scale, right? It's a spectrum. Again, if you're talking something like your basic Chat GPT or even GPT-4, yes, it can, but it won't be as good as, say, a custom trained data set that's trained specifically on, for example, let's take Stephen King, right? Who has a large known set of work. If I were to ask ChatGPT to take a story that I wrote and gave it and say, rewrite this in the form of Stephen King, it would probably do an okay job because there's enough material in its training set to make that work. But if I were to come in and say, take a example, if I were to take like a chapter from Carrie and drop it in and say, make it sound like me, it's probably not going to do as well, right? Because if it doesn't know who I am as a new writer, as an example. So that's why I'm saying it depends. So the more you can train it, then the better it'll get, is the short answer. And it's getting easier and easier to do that, although now going to the hallucination part, there is a caveat. Again, this is why what we say is we don't look for ChatGPT to create information. We look at it to polish information. So I look to the author, the thought leader, that person. I want the information to come from their brain. I just want the computer to clean it up. So for me, in ghostwriting, limiting it to that context, that's the proper order of things, because then it's serving a very specific goal and you're far less likely to have hallucinations because you're not asking it to fill in blanks. But if you're trying to flip it around and say, I want it to do all the writing for me, I just wanted to give it a topic, the more freedom you give it, then the more likely you're going to have it create something that's not accurate, or that's maybe partially accurate, or maybe is biased. A lot of people are talking about that. The answer, that's what I think, depends. But is it theoretically possible? Absolutely. It's just how much work are you willing to put in to get it there? But as of right now, you can't just say, write me a Stephen King book and expect it to spit it out with no work. We're not there yet. And maybe we will be, but we're not quite there yet. But you can, with a little bit of effort, you can definitely get an entire chapter out of a conversation like this, or several chapters out of a conversation like this that are edited and formatted properly and can be used as a basis for a book or content that really truly does reflect the voice, tone, and opinions of the author, because it started with that.
Yeah, that's beautifully explained. I think one of the things which you touched upon, I think there would be these limitations, challenges with which AI will somehow face, whether it's the accuracy at that level, but the custom data aspect of how on which you're training the model. And that's where probably we also need multi-LLMs to even do different things, maybe summarization separately or running a complete Q&A beyond that. Any specific limitations or challenges that comes to your mind today, James, that the industry is facing, let's say with ghostwriting or publishing? And if there are at this moment, how are you overcoming those, or what's your thought around those now? If you're seeing that pretty often, maybe on a day-to-day basis with your work, would love to know that for sure.
Other than some of the stuff we just talked about as far as limited in what it can produce based on a given input, I think that probably the other issue that we're looking at, or at least in my circle, we're thinking about long-term is they're interrelated, but there's a couple things. One is the overuse, right? Like it's hard enough to stand out as it is, but when everybody's using it to game the system, you flood you flood the market with all this content, most of which is created now, or more and more of which is being created by a computer, which becomes its own problem, because then that training data gets pulled in for the next iteration. So it starts training itself. And that's one of the concerns or fears is finding that balance of, yes, it's a great tool and it's a co-writer and it can be an editor and it can be a publisher and it can help you. But just like I was saying before, it still has to come from a place. The way I would describe it, it has to come from that human element, that heart element that the computer doesn't have. It can outthink you all day long. It can't outfeel you, at least not yet, maybe one day. But right now, that's your advantage. Is you had a lived experience that brought an emotion to you, right? Or even a religious context. And if that's what you're sharing, then the AI can enhance it. But it's not a replacement for a lived experience. You know what I'm saying? You can't just be like, create me a week's worth of content for my business. It'll do that, but it's going to not be great. It's going to just be a week's worth of basic content like every other person out there that's saying, give me 10 weeks worth of basic content. And so I think that's one of the issues right now that I think is a lot of people are starting to see on the surface. And the thing that's becoming more and more popular right now is virtual clones, if you will, where people are training their own like mini thems. You can actually create a little mini version of you and put it on your website or on your Slack or whatever. And then when customers come in, or friends or family for that matter, and instead of talking to you, they talk to the digital you. And so they can converse and it'll answer as if it were you, pulling from your knowledge base that you're updating, right? And this is great for executives or thought leaders or authors that want to engage, or actors or whatever, that want to engage with their fans in a personal way, but at scale. That's a little bit of a concern for me, because we've already seen people that can't distinguish the fact that this is a bot versus a human. And so they start forming real human emotional connections with a bot, right? And then they start projecting that onto the human rather than the avatar, if that makes sense. For example, so let's say Tom Hanks makes a digital Tom Hanks, right? America's Dad or whatever. And it's great. Everybody goes and they talk to him about advice. They talk about his movie career. They want him to do the Forrest Gump quotes all day long ad nauseum. And it's happy to do that. But there's one or two people that they've grown up with Tom Hanks and they really see him. And if I could just meet Tom Hanks, we'd be best friends. I know me and I've seen him. I know him. We're going to just hit it off. And then you go on and you start talking to the digital AI, the digital Tom Hanks, who is programmed to make you feel like Tom Hanks cares about you. So then you started doing this, and so it starts feeding your own, oh, I knew we would hit it off, see? And then, okay, you build this 6-month relationship with fake Tom Hanks, and then you go to a movie premiere or whatever, and there he is at the red carpet. Yo, Tom! Yo, man, it's me. You remember me? You don't know who the hell you are. My worry is that we're already more and more becoming an isolated society where everybody lives in these little bubbles. I mean, even you and I, like we're talking through screens right now. But give it 2 years, we might not be having this conversation. Digital me and digital you, they're having the conversation. So those are the things long term, I think, for any industry can be problematic as people put more and more, they offload more and more of the decision making rather than the execution to the AI. And I think that's a mistake because whether it's talking about publishing or you're talking about finance or you're talking about any other business, because I also do some defense things like that. Like the problem in my mind, this is opinion light, but the problem in my mind is when AI is a really good, it's like money, right? It's a really good servant. It's not a great master, right? Tell it what to do and it can do it. If it didn't do it right, iterate and it'll do it over and over. It'll never be offended that you're trying to tweak it. Like those like clients that you always hear the horror stories, like it's never good enough. They want 1,000 revisions, right? That's what AI is perfect for. It'll do 1,001 revisions with a smile. But what's not great is when you start giving it the ability to make those autonomous decisions that affect other human beings. That's what scares me because it's such a natural impulse to just delegate that responsibility off because the AI is smarter. Oh, it has access to more information. And those things are true. I'm not like saying it's bad, but I'm saying that it's just human tendency to let the computer do it and never question it again. And that to me opens up a lot of potential for abuse or just even inadvertently just oppressive, quote unquote, scenarios, or at the very least takes away a lot of autonomy and the human element of those discussions that I think are important, particularly for things like medical or law enforcement, where you're going to be dealing with somebody at the worst moment of their life, potentially.
Yeah, it needs that. No, totally. It just needs that, certainly the validation and human in the loop that's why so critical. Keeping that discussion in mind, but just going back into the literary elements. Now, writing often involves the use of complex literary elements such as theme, symbolism, and subtext. How does generative AI or AI handle these nuanced aspects of literature and today precisely? And can AI comprehend and generate intricate literary devices to the same degree as a human writer? I think you touched upon it to an extent based on the prompting, but is it getting there at all, James? And you could very much keep it more vision oriented to your answer. Like, where do you see and how do you see the comprehension and generating of intricate literary devices to the degree of human intelligence is going to happen today, or if it's already happening, or there's a future for it?
There's a lot of questions in there. So I would say to start with, so like I'll say some things that it's good at is guiding or can be good at is guiding you through, say, a literary framework. If you were to say something like, if you asked it for a metaphor, or if you asked it for something specific like that, like I want a metaphor about a duck and a piece of wood, and it talks about why you should make your bed every morning. It'll create something within those parameters. Yeah, it's it'll sound like a human wrote it. The more parameters you give it, then the closer it'll probably get to what you're wanting. So if you can give it examples, that's always helpful, even if it's just within the prompt. Like if you can say, here's an example, but but for your version, I want it to be about this. I want it to be longer, shorter, better, whatever. And it's fairly good at that. Yeah. And then again, it also depends on what we're talking about. So I mentioned Chapterly, I think earlier. So Chapterly is a fun one. So Chapterly, if you're an author, if you're looking to write a book, nonfiction or fiction, Chapterly is a pretty good option because the AI that's built into Chapterly is designed a little bit differently. I'm not affiliated with the company, so I don't know a lot about their backend, but just from usage, I can tell that their training model is a little bit different from what you get from some of the larger models. And it also pulls in context from your book, right? Because you can create books within the app, like a bookshelf. So you can work on multiple projects at once, and it knows which project you're in, and it knows the characters and the tone. And you can also use within that system, you can use some of those existing frameworks, like we were talking about earlier. It's got a whole list of frameworks, and it'll walk you through those frameworks, right? And then if you hit a stopping point, you just hit a button and it'll start writing for you. So it'll write the next sentence or it'll write the next paragraph for you and keep that continuity going. And so if you're talking about something like that, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity because you're working with an established framework or you're utilizing a well-known model or something of that nature. It's pretty good at that. So it makes a pretty decent coach in that sense. But again, it all depends on how much information you give it. If you were to just say, hey, write me a book, it wouldn't necessarily it probably would try to follow some type of best practice, but it wouldn't necessarily follow the one that you want.
Spot on. Brilliant. And now with that and with the next phase of the discussion where I think we touched upon some of it while talking, the narratives which is being built and how with technological advances, ethical considerations play a pretty critical role. What are some key ethical concerns when using generative AI for ghostwriting you may see today? And how does one manage, let's say, attribution, authorship, like when AI is contributing significantly to the final work? How ethical considerations and contributions and attributions are managed today in the ghostwriting or publishing industry?
I think the obvious ethical one that probably comes to my mind, at least, is obviously using work that other people either didn't know was being utilized by AI in the first place, or they posted it and it just got scraped or something like that. And in that sense, you could argue that you're using that work. And there's no way to really attribute it to them because it's one of a billion people that have contributed to any given large model. And you're seeing pushback in right now. And that's and you also see, it's not just we're talking about publishing. You see it a lot, or you see the conversation a lot more around art with people talking about how my art was used. And you can go and type in the style of a particular artist and reproduce work in their style. And so that you could argue there's an ethical, because you could argue that it's diminishing the value of the real thing, or again, flooding the market to the point where the real thing is no longer even wanted because I'm so sick of seeing it. And you can do that with writing too. Again, we were talking about Stephen King. Any well-known author in the last decade, you could probably steal their voice pretty well, right? And even if it's not an author, even if it's just, like I said, a thought leader or a public figure, or hell, if you did enough work, you could grab enough probably off of just scraping some random person's social media that you could build a model off of them. And then you could write in their voice convincingly enough. And we've already seen this. Scammers utilizing this. There's going to be a lot of that. The other thing that's a kind of an offshoot of that, this is probably something not as many people care about, but within the context of the industry, I think it's important to consider is a little bit like we were talking about before, but now that anyone basically can come in and write a book on pretty much any subject utilizing these tools, to me, the ethical question is, yeah, but what responsibility as the author do you have? Because if you're going in and writing a book and you're not a subject expert, and then you're relying on AI to fill in your knowledge gaps, then you're far more likely to introduce those hallucinations that you were talking about, or even just in bringing in theories or things that have been put on the internet but aren't necessarily accepted, or maybe they've been disproven or changed over time. But because you're not in the quote unquote industry that you're talking about, or you don't know a lot about the subject you're writing about, but you want to be perceived as an expert, it's really easy to just spit a book out, put your name on it. I always tell this story, but I had a client come in and I always ask the set of questions, right? And this is a few years ago. And I said, what is your book about? Why you want to write? What's your book about? They go, oh, I don't care. I'm like, that's a problem. What do you mean you don't care? How could you not care? What do you mean? What did you come here to write? She literally said, oh, just whatever will get me on Oprah. That's the book I want to write. And it's okay. So you're not a good fit for us. But the problem is there's plenty of people that would take that in a heartbeat, and AI isn't going to ask questions. It's going to be like, all right, based on statistics and what's trending right now, you probably want to write about these three things, one of these three things. Which one do you want to write about? Oh, I want to write about number 2. I've seen that in the news. I know that's trending. Great. Boom. Here's an outline, because that's the first thing you would do is create me an outline. All right, great. Now here's the trick. Here's how you do it if you want to be an independent publisher. Here's how you would do it. I don't recommend it's unethical, but if you want to pretend to be a subject matter expert on something, just go to ChatGPT, figure out whatever trending thing you want to be an expert on, have it write you an outline, 12 chapters, okay? And then for each chapter, tell it to write you create 3 sub-chapters, right? And it's going to create a list. And then you take each of those and say, write me a blog post on each sub-chapter thing. So then you're basically just building out a branch. You stick all those together, you put it in a book, you publish it on Amazon, and then boom, now you're an author. Congratulations, you're an expert. And that's all it takes. Now, is any of the information factual? You probably don't know. You could read it and it might sound good, but do you know? If you're not an expert, you're not going to know. And your readers certainly aren't going to know. But worse than that, they're going to assume that you do. And so they're not going to read it and go, man, this is probably an AI hallucination. They're going to read it and go, oh, okay, that's how it is because so-and-so told me. And for me, when we talk about ethics, that's a big issue, right? Because it's so easy to fake it now.
Yeah, and the misinformation can carry forward, right? I think it just may assume something and put together, and then now, and that's the nature of generative models, right? It has to throw up and spit out some output, no fact checks on top, right? And then eventually somebody's reading it, maybe, yeah, to your point, understanding if it's coming from this author who probably is now known, he's been seen everywhere, and then it's okay, he's saying so. I mean, that may be true, but nobody's fact checking it. So yeah, that's very concerning and can be scary in the longer run, for sure. Misinformation can travel so fast.
If you're writing fiction, sometimes those hallucinations can be amazing because they'll take your story in a direction you never would have thought of on your own. And you're just like, that's not even a thing. But now that it's in here, I'm going to run with it. And I've had that happen too. It's not all bad. But yeah, I think there's a different level of responsibility for nonfiction versus fiction.
Totally. And practical approaches to things if you're putting together some thoughts out. Absolutely. I think fiction, that's a good example. Keeping fiction in mind, that's where you need to imagine things. And I think probably generative models can do a lot more better there, 100%. Cool. So probably towards the last question here, and this is just, I think you touched upon it when we first started the discussion today in the morning, is if we have to cast our gaze to the future and considering the trajectory of generative AI and AI advancements and innovations, where do you envision AI's role in independent publishing, including ghostwriting 5 or 10 years down the line from now? And if you can project any potential advancements, which you might be foreseeing already, James, because I figured out that there's so much of insights you were able to share. So those will be the final thoughts and questions for you, and then we'll definitely go ahead towards the closure.
I mean, 5 to 10, who knows? Things change so quickly now. But I will say, I think where eventually we'll get to, maybe even in closer to the 5-year range, just like we were talking about personalized generative entertainment, I think you're going to have personalized generative news. You're going to have personalized generative education, right? You're going to have this real time. The information I need will be provided when I need it, and it will be provided contextually by the AI. And I think that's eventually where we'll get to. So it'll be less, hey, what do I want to watch? It won't be like right now where you go on Netflix and you start clicking through things, or I go to Amazon, I want to read that book or Kindle or whatever. I feel like what's going to happen is more and more it's going to be, hey, I want to read about this, produce it. Hey, I want to see this, produce it. And so it'll be that instant, and that can be good or bad. The good side of it is anytime I'm in any situation, I don't have to stop, go on Amazon, look at 5,000 books on a topic and hope I order the right one and not know until after I've read it and invested that time. Now it's, hey, read the top 10 books on marketing that were written in the last 5 years or in the last 5 months and give me the top 3 takeaways that they all agree on. So that I could execute that right now. So you have private readers that give you the things like that, where you can start having that dialogue, and it can be more of a research assistant. And if that is the case, my assumption is, I could be way wrong, my assumption is reading will become less, and nonfiction reading will change. Nonfiction publishing will change because it'll be less and less of these educational leadership style books that are very popular right now. You know, how to do this, how to do that, top 10 whatevers. I think you're going to see less and less of those because it'll be so much easier to get that through the AI. What you might start seeing as far as being like produced for mass consumption will be more stories, will be more bios, will be more maybe and like self-written bios as opposed to like something, because again, anything academic, the AI can produce for me. So what is it? Where does that leave the human? It's like you were talking about a minute ago. It's about that creativity or stuff. And so I think what we're going to start seeing is more and more, what we were talking about earlier, independent, small teams that are self-publishing their own stories, right? Their own IPs in interconnected world. And I think that one of the things we're seeing now that's really exciting for me, it's not necessarily It's empowered by AI in a lot of cases, but not necessarily. But it's collaborative writing, which is not necessarily a new thing. It's been around. But with AI now, you can do collaborative writing in such a different way. You can create story branches where, you and I might start at the same starting point in a story, but if we go through, say, a week together on a platform where we're reading the same story, but it's choose your own adventure, right? Except we're generating the story as we go. By the end, we might have started with the same story seed, but we'll have two very different trees at the end. To me, that's one of the things that kind of we're working on too, is when you're looking at, I'm going to pick up my next book, it's not going to be a finished story. It's going to be a potential adventure that you're going to co-create as you go through that story.
So true. That's brilliant. That analogy of we start from the same point, but how I create those dynamic workflows through asking different prompting or whatsoever that may be to build a narrative could be so different from what we both may be thinking about that similar topic.
And then,
wow, very interesting. I think sometimes I have seen even asking ChatGPT, it builds different narratives. Even if you ask it, hey, just give me another iteration. It's completely different from the previous one. And then you can ask for specific prompts to make it whatever you like and tone.
No, you're spot on. Exactly right. And now you have the ability to do that as a group. But my point is you could take a system like that, which is being used for 100 applications right now across all different industries. But you could take something like that and apply it to publishing, and you could create a story as a group using this voting metric to determine key points and create multiple or alternative branches like we were talking about it a minute ago. But as a group of 10, 20, 30, 100. So if I'm Marvel, right, and I wanted to do something like this, then I could be like, hey guys, we have a, Captain America story or an Avengers story, and it starts here. Here's the world. But who shows up next? Dr. Doom. I can't think of any other bad guys. Dr. Doom, Mr. Sinister, or Sabretooth. I don't know those three. But anyway, who shows up? And then we vote. And then based on who gets voted on, that creates the next story, and then you keep voting. Then you could go and you could take that and then you could publish it. You could turn it into an animation, right? You could do, and that what's great is that's also one of the things I see happening is people that are traditionally authors. That's why I start using the term storytellers more, because I think that's going to be a more accurate term as we go forward, because you're no longer going to be an author or an artist or an editor. You're just going to be the storyteller that does all of these things utilizing AI. And I think what you're going to start seeing is people that do that, where they build communities around their fans, and then they start having those collaborative expressions, building worlds or characters or stories with their fans so that the fans have that ownership. They have that, because right now, the one thing that both the fans and the creatives agree on is that the studio makes horrible decisions that nobody likes. And so if we get rid of them and it's just the fans and the creatives working together collaboratively, I think there's a huge opportunity to tell stories that we've never seen before, to do things that no studio would ever sign off on. And it's self-funded by the people that are creating the story as fans that want to see the story. You know what I'm saying? It's like this self-fulfilling thing. And that's, to me, is an exciting avenue that we're starting to just see the very early days of. And then once you have the story, then it's just a whole, like we were talking about earlier, great. Now there's no reason I couldn't take another system, put it on top of that, and have it render that story as a comic, and then have it render that comic as a movie. And so now all of a sudden I've gone from some random dude in a Discord to now I'm like a co-creator of a movie, my own movie that I helped create by my votes, right? And then you're going to want to share everybody. So you got a built-in distribution network. So anyway, that's where I see things.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Wow, that's so exciting. I've never seen the world that way at all. This is brilliant, James. Well, on that note, I really want to thank you so much for today, James. Frankly, given we are in more platform technology field, doing different things, but perspective of how you do publishing, ghostwriting, and what the advantages could be, and then eventually the biases, how you see the future. I think there's so much to learn from. I'm sure the audiences who was going to listen to this could take a turn back from this episode for sure. Thank you so much, James, for today. It's been a true pleasure to having you here at Not Another Bot, the Generative AI Show. And we would definitely love to talk to you more in future for sure. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I'd love it. I appreciate the time. It's been a blast.
How impactful was that episode? Not Another Bot, the Generative AI Show, is brought to you by Yellow.ai. To To find out more about Yellow.ai and how you can transform your business with AI-powered automation, visit YELLOW.ai. And then make sure to search for the Generative AI Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Yellow.ai, thank you for listening.